At the peak of its power, the British Empire was described as the empire on which the sun never sets, because it was so vast and spread across various continents that the sun was always shining on at least one of its territories. It once ruled over 57 colonies and territories from all across the world. British researcher Stephen Luscombe calculates, from London, the British ruled about 25% of the world's population, governed nearly 25% of the world's landmass, and used to represent 35% of the total global GDP. But most of that wealth, if not all, was built by exploiting and oppressing the British-ruled colonies, committing heinous humanitarian crimes, loot and destruction in the process. If one thing history has taught us is that all empires fall eventually, no matter how powerful, destructive or brutal they are. This is the story of the falling British Empire. Britain's decline started 40 years before India gained independence when it entered World War I on 4th August 1914. 4 years and 20 million deaths later, the Allied powers won the war. Although Britain was part of the winning team, it was in no mood for celebration because it knew that it had lost more than it had won. World War I was a prolonged, brutal and expensive conflict. Broadberry and Harrison write in the Economics of the World War I, more than 7 lakh British soldiers died in the conflict and over 15 lakhs were wounded. Britain lost 3.6% of its human capital, 10% of its domestic and 24% of its overseas assets. Economic recovery was not going to be easy for Britain because of the massive human capital loss and the rising liberal economic world order. Throughout World War I, countries such as Japan and the United States were able to replace Britain in the international markets in industries such as textile and international lending. As a result, Britain suffered a permanent loss of world market share. From 1913 to 1920, in a matter of just 7 years, the volume of British exports went down by over 25%. While Britain was dealing with its economic downfall, in India, Mahatma Gandhi's diplomacy was failing to show much promise. Gandhi and the Indian National Congress helped the British during World War I by recruiting Indian soldiers. They hoped that if India helped Britain, it might deal with India more reasonably. Fighting imperial campaigns was not new for the Indian army. It had previously fought not just on the northwest frontier of India, but also in places like China, Abyssinia, Perak, Egypt and Sudan. British India for decades had been a cheap supplier of military labor available to be used by the imperial authorities. Over 1 million Indian soldiers served overseas in the World War I. The Indian National Congress led by Mahatma Gandhi expected that Britain would at least consider giving semi-independence to India in exchange for its help in the war efforts. A government by Indian leaders under the British crown, more like a semi-autonomous region within the British Empire. That's all they were hoping for. But as soon as the World War I ended, Britain backtracked from this arrangement because to fuel economic recovery, Britain needed its colonies now more than ever. To Britain, India had been an invaluable source of various natural resources. Agricultural products like rice, wheat, sugar and cotton. Natural minerals like iron ore, coal, copper and zinc. Why sacrifice all that? For the freedom of Indians? No way. Whatever the British values of freedom and liberty were, did not apply to its colonies. But little did they know what was coming for them. In the year 1919, Britain imposed the Rowlatt Act on Indians that gave police the authority to search places and arrest people without any warrant. Police started exploiting this act to arrest anybody based on mere suspicion. People who got arrested couldn't even get their fundamental right to defend themselves in court. Many were falsely executed. To oppose this act, Mahatma Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement. His reasoning behind it was simple. Britain was successfully ruling India because of the cooperation it was getting from Indians. So what if everyone just stops cooperating? What if no one obeys any orders from the British officials? And what if no one buys any goods or clothes manufactured by the British? Under the command of Mahatma Gandhi, people did just that. Millions came forward and participated in the movement. Its success was a total shock to the British Empire. To crush this movement, Britishers threw Mahatma Gandhi into jail. 13th April 1919, Amritsar, Punjab. To condemn the arrest of Mahatma Gandhi, innocent civilians assembled at Jallianwala Bagh and organized a peaceful protest. It was a festive season for the Sikh community called Baisakhi. Innocent children, women and elders were present. On mere suspicion of possible rebellion, Colonel Reginald Dyer gave orders to open fire at people until they ran out of bullets.
Fire!
This incident shook Indians to their core. For the first time, they realized that non-violent protest won't be enough to gain freedom.
General Dyer, is it correct that you ordered your troops to fire at the thickest part of the crowd?
That is so.
1,516 casualties with 1,650 bullets.
My intention was to inflict a lesson that would have an impact throughout all India.
General, had you been able to take in the armored car, would you have opened fire with the machine gun?
I think probably yes.
General, did you realize there were children and women in the crowd?
I did.
But that was irrelevant to the point you were making.
That is correct.
After witnessing the failure of Gandhi's non-cooperation and diplomatic ways of dealing with Britain, many young Indian freedom fighters lost faith in him. They decided to take up arms against the British. They bombed the parliament and killed British officers and were subsequently executed.
The two men responsible for throwing bombs at the Central Assembly Hall in Delhi have been identified as Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt.
If the deaf are to hear, the sound has to be very loud, stated Bhagat Singh, an Indian revolutionary, at the trial for bombing the Delhi Central Legislative Assembly. While India was witnessing a surge of revolutionaries who did not believe in the non-violent ways of Gandhi, in Europe the economic scenario was getting even more desperate. From 1929 to 1939, the world witnessed the Great Economic Depression. It was particularly long and severe in European countries such as Germany. Unemployment, business failures, deflation, name any social economic problem and Germany had it. On top of that, the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I was making Germany pay large war reparations. It was expected to pay somewhere between $12 to $30 billion. It placed a heavy burden on German people. They lost faith in their government and started looking for extreme political alternatives. One such alternative was Adolf Hitler. Economic historians credit the Great Depression for the rise of Hitler. He used people's anger and economic insecurities to push forward his political propaganda. He gained popular support by promising to solve the country's economic problems and restore national pride. British historian Norman Davies writes, "In Germany, the rise of Hitler and his Nazi party was unquestionably connected to the Great Depression. The Nazis did not march on Berlin. There was no seizure of power. Hitler did not have to topple a weakened government as the Bolsheviks did in Russia, nor threaten the head of state like Mussolini did in Italy. Hitler came to power through participation in Germany's democratic process and at the invitation of the lawful authorities." Back in India, the British Empire continued ruthlessly suppressing any political activism that challenged British authority. The British used false promises of social reforms to silence members of the Indian National Congress and kept arresting and executing Indian revolutionaries. But not every Congress member stayed silent. Leaders like Bose preached aggressive nationalism. He knew that the right amount of force, strategy and dialogue should be used to scare off the British. This led to the split in Congress and eventually Bose had to resign. Then there were Indian leaders who were demanding separate electorates for Muslims and depressed class. While Indian leaders were busy with their internal politics, in Germany, Hitler became the new name of power. He annexed Austria and invaded Poland. His actions led to World War II. As soon as Germany invaded Poland, France and Britain declared war on Germany, starting World War II in Europe. India did not have anything to do with this European conflict, but still the British Empire announced that India will fight this war. Gandhiji this time was against India's involvement, but his campaign was unsuccessful. More than 2 million Indian soldiers joined British Army to fight in the name of freedom, the very freedom that Britain had been denying India for decades. During the World War II, Indians fought for their freedom on two fronts. One front was led by the preachers of non-violence and another by the advocates of aggressive nationalism. We shall either free India or die in the attempt. We shall not live to see the perpetuation of our slavery. Every true congressman and woman will join the struggle with inflexible determination not to remain alive to see the country in bondage and slavery. With these words, Mahatma Gandhi started Quit India movement in 1942. In response, Britain arrested Gandhi and the entire Congress and brutally beat up innocent women and men who supported the movement. Gandhi's health started deteriorating in jail. His wife died in prison. The British Empire realized that if Mahatma Gandhi died in prison, no one would be able to save British officials from the Indians. They released him to avoid calling the wrath of people upon them. But no matter how much brutality Britain used, this time people just did not stop fighting for freedom peacefully. Just a year after Gandhiji started the Quit India movement, the failure of the British administration under Winston Churchill caused the Bengal famine that led to the deaths of more than 2 million people. Churchill deliberately diverted food away from India during the war to feed Europeans, causing one of the worst famines in the country's history. British historian Richard Overy writes, "In Bengal, the distortion of the market for food as a result of the war combined with a poor rice harvest and a British failure to release the shipping space necessary to transfer food surpluses resulted in the death of at least 2 million people." How did then British PM Winston Churchill handle this calamity? By making the famous remark that the Bengal famine was caused by the tendency of Indians to breed like rabbits. Nobel Prize winner economist Amartya Sen writes in his book, "The Bengal famine proved to be the last famine in India in the century, since famines disappeared with the British Raj." After going through the horrors of Bengal famine, more Indians joined Gandhi's Quit India movement. The second front was led by none other than Subhash Chandra Bose, an aggressive nationalist from Calcutta. He saw World War II as an opportunity to strike Britain where it would hurt the most. "It is our duty to pay for our liberty with our own blood. It is blood alone that can pay the price of freedom. Give me blood and I will give you freedom." Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. The irony of India was that Britain ruled India with the help of Indians who served in the British Army. They were the backbones of British power in Asia. They not only helped the empire to maintain control in India, but also proved instrumental in protecting the British interests in China.
Bose wanted to reach the 2 million Indian volunteers of the British Indian Army. These men were the bedrock of the British Raj.
Bose wanted to snatch that power away from the Brits. In 1941, he escaped to Germany, joined hands with Hitler, and organized an army of 4,500 soldiers to fight against the British. His reasoning behind this was simple: the enemy of your enemy is your friend. This created a lot of confusion. One army of Indians was fighting for the British, and one was fighting against them. And the army that was fighting against them was inspiring more and more Indian soldiers as the war progressed. Mostly because Indian soldiers were tired of facing racism in the British army and fighting for a cause that had nothing to do with India. From a radio station in Germany, Bose addressed Indian soldiers and appealed to them not to fight for the British but against the British and help India to gain freedom. Inspired by his message, Indian sailors of the Royal Indian Navy went on strike. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny started in Bombay as a strike by Indian sailors demanding better food, accommodations and equal treatment. They refused to obey any orders from their officers and left their posts. Soon the strike evolved into an open revolt with many cities joining in. Sailors from Karachi, Calcutta, Pune, Vizag, Cochin, Madras and the Andaman Islands. In Bombay, it took a violent turn. Hundreds of protesters targeted the British residents and officers of the city. They even took control of the Butcher Island, where the entire ammunition of the Bombay presidency was stored. The rebels also found support from the Royal Indian Air Force men from Bombay and from the Gorkhas in Karachi, who, known for their loyalty, refused to fire at the strikers. People who have watched my video on how Britain occupied India Know that in the beginning, the British Empire started off by consolidating its position in coastal cities and from there spread its legs across India. But now the control of coastal cities was slipping out of their hands. The Royal Indian Navy mutiny struck at the heart of the British establishment. They realized that their control over India was being threatened as the loyalty of their key tool, the armed forces, was no longer guaranteed. Imagine this. In your ongoing military operation, what if your own soldiers take up arms against you? Where would that lead you? The British Empire was frightened by the possibility of rebellion by Indian soldiers fighting World War II. What if Indian soldiers start killing the British officials during the battle? Questions like these did not let British authorities sleep in peace. Gandhi and Bose represent the yin and yang of the Indian freedom struggle, both opposite but interconnected forces that helped propel India towards freedom. But saying that Gandhi and Bose were the only reason why India got freedom would be factually incorrect. There was a third factor at play: post-World War II economics. With Hitler's suicide, World War II came to an end. This time again, the British Empire was part of the winning team, but its economy was as bad as some of the defeated countries. The bombing of British cities and industrial areas by German forces caused significant damage to infrastructure, factories and homes, which was costly to repair. It needed more money and labor to rebuild economy, but both were in short supply. Britain's overseas trade was in shambles as shipping lanes were disrupted by enemy action and many of the country's trading partners were occupied by Axis powers. This led to a decline in exports and a decrease in the flow of vital raw materials. Men were called up to fight and women were called on to work in war-related industries, which led to a decline in productivity and a decrease in economic output. The British Empire faced a severe shortage of consumer goods, high levels of government debt and inflation. Richard Robert writes, after World War II, Britain had liquidated much of its overseas investments and financially was virtually as weak as the defeated countries. World War II gave rise to the New World Order. It ended Britain's hegemony and gave rise to two superpowers, Soviet Union and the United States of America. Britain became a junior partner of the United States in global diplomacy, and its collapsing economy made sure that the empire does not find enough security investments to maintain colonies. The financially and politically weakened Britain was in no position to fight the decolonization movements across Asia. That's one of the primary reasons why Britain hastily decided to leave India. British historian Ashley Jackson writes, not only was Britain's economic lead being cut as other nations industrialized and developed as military, trading and financial powers, but the burdens of defending the empire eroded its position further. It begged the question, did empire make Britain stronger or weaker? Was this vast empire even worth defending anymore? And they eventually decided it wasn't. That was the last one. In India, political parties keep debating over who is the real hero of the Indian freedom struggle. Some debate in favor of aggressive nationalists and some in favor of Mahatma Gandhi's non-violence. But the truth is, Britain's decision to leave India was driven by a combination of domestic and international factors, including the growing nationalist movement in India, the economic cost of maintaining British rule, and the recognition that it was unlikely to be able to maintain control of India in the face of growing opposition. Here is the list of 7 factors that contributed to the success of Indian freedom struggle. Giving any one person or one ideology the credit for India's independence would not be fair to all those who suffered endlessly for India's freedom. While revolutionaries and nationalists struck fear in British hearts, liberals like Mahatma Gandhi united Indian masses ranging from small villages to big cities, and the economic downfall of the British Empire gave Britain no choice but to leave India. To economically support my efforts to create well-researched videos, you can either buy books from my affiliate links or send me super thanks. I thank all the contributors for their valuable contributions. You guys are making it a lot easier to put my time and energy into creating well-researched videos. Thank you once again.